How's everyone doing today? Thank you so much for inviting me. Such a beautiful, beautiful venue. It's great to be here. I'm Areej. I'm the founder of Krolina, which is an independent SEO consultancy, and the creator of the awesome Women in Tech SEO. I know we have a lot of us here. So I wanted to talk about seasonal SEO because this is something I've been focusing on a lot for the last 2 years or so with an e-commerce client of mine that I'm working with. It's a term that we tend to use a lot. And we tend to use it more when we work with e-commerce. This is your typical Google Trends chart. We saw a lot of that earlier today where we kept guessing what it could mean and we weren't too sure. But you know, your typical like type of event-based stuff. So Valentine's Day, for example, like you get that, you know, peak and then drop. The thing I love about this chart is that more people are giving less of a shit about Valentine's Day as the years go by. So that makes my heart very happy. So the whole purpose of it is what we're trying to do is we want to drive conversions during a specific period where we know that there is high demand and there's high interest. Seasonality can come in all kinds of shapes and forms. It could be, you know, event-based, right? Like you could have something around Valentine's Day or Black Friday or Christmas. It could be something around a specific time period. So you could have peaks happen like around summertime, Q4, the end of the year. It could be something that happens in a specific month, like January, for example. Or it could be based on products as well. So the launch of the iPhone or the launch of like the new MacBook or a new version of an Xbox or something like that. And we tend to use the term peak a lot when we're talking about high seasonality. So whenever you're working on a new website or you've joined a new in-house role, you have a new client, a really important question to always ask, you know, like, oh, when is peak season for you? When does that happen? It could be several times a year. It could be a specific period. But it's very, very important for us to not assume when peak period happens. So what I want to cover today is I want to talk a little bit about the strategy and process that we put in place and how we can best optimize our websites before peak, during peak, and after peak. All right, so let's get started. So before peak, all of it is kind of about getting set up. We've all worked in a company like this before, where peak is about to happen, and then the day before it, you get a meeting in, and you're like, oh my God, we're gonna have to plan it all today, which is absolutely ridiculous. It's so important for us to plan everything in advance. I think usually with peak seasons, we're talking minimum a quarter in advance for you to put your plans in place. I think the process kind of focuses on 3 different things. So we kind of benchmark everything we have going on, we put a plan together, and then we go live. And what I want to do is kind of walk us through what we do in each one of these steps. So when it comes to benchmarking, the first question I always like to ask is how did we perform last peak? So your typical type of data benchmark that you might see is, let's say you look at your organic traffic and your organic revenue, and you know that currently it looks something like this. Let's say that on a monthly basis, you have around 300,000 organic traffic coming in, a little bit over 1 million. And then, you know, the way you tend to report is you go like, well, year on year, you know, we had an increase of 5% here and 2% there. But then month on month, oh, wow, we've had a drop. But it's like, yeah, of course, if you're dealing with your typical type of high seasonal websites, then it doesn't really make sense for us to be doing the usual kind of reporting, which is year on year and month on month. It doesn't make sense because we're not really comparing apples with apples at this point. We know that we go through different seasonality trends. And so even the concept of naming things as current and year on year doesn't really make sense either. What kind of makes sense at that point when you set a data benchmark is to have, okay, for peak 2022, this is what it looked like. And so what I want to compare it with is what's going to happen in 23, and then do that comparison to see the change that happened over time. It's very important for us to not stick to our typical reporting, even if we're used to, you know, pumping out reports on a monthly basis. But when it comes to setting benchmarks or putting reports in place for our peak seasons, it's very important for us to make them a bit different for them to actually make sense. We need to make sure that we're reporting on data that's relevant and then compare it with data that's equally relevant, right? And of course, we have to bear in mind like all the crazy things that have been happening over the past few years, right? Scary stuff. We've seen that happen a lot with e-commerce websites where they got so excited because it's like, oh my God, pandemic, I made so much money, great for me. But then, oh, I forecasted that I'm gonna make even more money this year, but oh no, people decided to go back in the streets again and do normal shopping. So then the second question you have to ask is, all right, well, I have my benchmark in place, but what's the opportunity this peak? And this is where you kind of start performing like not your typical keyword research, but you understand, well, on a seasonal basis in advance, what does that look like? So the opportunity data could be things like, well, what's my current rankings and traffic? What's the seasonal search volume for some of these terms? What's the forecasted traffic at ranking increase? But most importantly, and this is what your stakeholders are looking for, what is the predicted revenue uplift? All right, so we've benchmarked our data. We know where we're standing. This is all before peak. We're talking a quarter in advance. Do not do it the night before, please. The second step is to start putting a plan together. So I have all this data, but I want to make sure my reporting is set up because I don't want to do that after peak happens and then I'm like, oh no, where are the numbers? People need reporting in place. So all the keyword research that you've done, make sure that you track and group it in advance and set up those dashboards, make sure they're automated, make sure there's monitoring in place. And then, start with the fun part, which is, all right, I'm gonna need to start making some updates to my website at this point. What's that gonna look like? So we know that, homepage, some of us agree or disagree. It might be important for these things, like trading, your trading team, your VM team are probably like obsessed with it, and this is like their main section of the website. Your landing pages, super important, category landing pages, your hub pages specifically, what they're gonna look like. Your PLPs, you might have specific PLPs. Let's say for Mother's Day is coming up, for example, so you potentially have something like Mother's Day gifts, which is a PLP that you kind of like revive, right, once a year. Your PDPs, again, you might be selling products specifically for seasonality. So around Christmas time, you've got your Christmas cards or your Christmas gifts or so forth. And then your supporting content assets, which is something like, I know Khushal touched on it just earlier today, around like the informational content that you might have in place, or you might take the time to kind of write it to make sure that it's supporting your upcoming seasonal trends. But internal linking is key, right? Like it's one thing for us to go ahead and like update all of that stuff, but then we need to also make sure that we internally link it properly. You have your usual pattern of, all right, well, my homepage is going to link to my landing page, and then the landing page will go to the PLP and so forth. But then you also need to make sure that you're linking into all of these awesome like supporting content assets that you've asked for all of this budget, right, to get content writers on board and to have people to write it. I've seen some really cool examples where on a product landing page, specifically in the copy that's written, they kind of go like, oh, do you want a guide for the best Mother's Day gifts? There you go, you can find it right here. Or you kind of put a card in the middle of the PLPs where you kind of show some of it. Even on specific product detail pages, I've also seen really good examples where it was like, oh, do you want some recommendations or do you want different guides of what you can buy? It doesn't all have to be buy, but you also want, to be kind of supporting and helping people who are visiting your website to kind of make the best decisions on what to go ahead with. And then of course, your homepage, it's there and it's important, right? And it really, really helps like spread that authority. Make sure that you're featuring some of your top seasonal products in there, your main PLPs, some of the awesome new content pieces that have been written. And your navigation, right? That's our main hero. That can be an entire talk on its own about how many wrong things one can possibly do when it comes to removing or adding things on the nav. But it's super important to have things like coming soon or new in or what to explore and make sure you're linking to all of these different seasonal aspects in them. And then updating the actual content on the pages. So this is something I always say, like evergreen is your friend, especially when it comes with URLs. I cry at the amount of times that people go like, oh, Mother's Day 2022, Mother's Day 2023. No, stop doing that, please. You don't need to add dates to any of your URLs. I'm sure many of us are in agreement to that. Having that one evergreen hub that we simply update on an annual or on a peak basis. Refresh, not restart. You probably have awesome content that's been written over the years. We don't need to write new content from scratch every single year. It's about maybe just giving it like a little bit of a refresh in terms of how we can improve it or how can we make it more relevant to what's happening right now. And just, you know, meta tags are a bit of like, Google might potentially ignore them, but still, like, it just makes me really, really upset when the Black Friday page for this year still tells me 2020. I do not want to go back to 2020. So let's make sure that we actually update those meta tags. And then, you know, do your tech checks, right? What tends to happen is, let's say it's a brand new hub, we're seeing it for the first time, and so we were working on a lot of stuff, like on a staging site aspect, and then we forget it. We leave it there, we go live, and then we realize, oh no, we've left some stuff blocked. So make sure you do those checks before peak. Is there anything that's blocked that shouldn't be blocked? Or is everything crawlable and indexable as needed? Are our filters, like what's happening with them? Did we introduce new filters, potentially, for some of these new seasonal things that we've forgotten to activate or add? Is everything behaving as expected when it comes to our canonicalization and so forth? So, you know, do all the tech checks before peak. And then when I shared this deck with Hannah Smith, she was like, Areej, what about your out of stock plan? I was like, yes, you are right. I forgot about that completely. And that's come to haunt me previously. But you have to put that plan in place beforehand, because if it's not in place and then it happens, you're like, oh no, I need to think really, really quickly. But please, and I think Luke is here and he's gonna be really happy about this, do not 404 your out of stock pages. Please don't do that no matter what. That's a crime. Christina's here as well, I'm sure she agrees. And just communicate that it's out of stock and offer alternatives, like do not kill that page, but also like give it a way for your users to be able to find something else on your site as opposed to being like, okay, I'm gonna go to that other site then. And even if it's permanently out of stock, that's okay. Just remove internal links that are pointing to it and like just redirect it to the primary PLP or the category landing page or so forth. But have that plan and make sure that you are ready to press the button to action it once out of stock happens. And just make sure you have all the monitoring reminders in the world. I love my calendar and I love to add things in it all the time. And so I go like, okay, peak is happening then. Well, I'm gonna have to make sure that this is when I'll do all my checks that are related to my landing page. And this is when I'm gonna do all my crawls. And these could be, you know, depending on how long peak is, I can be like, okay, I need to make sure that I'm crawling the site at least once a week to make sure that nothing is going wrong or nothing is broken or so forth. But just like put these reminders in place, make sure that you're monitoring those keywords that you have, make sure that you're checking the report checks, everything that you've set up in terms of the traffic and revenue and so forth. And then it's time to go live, right? Like you've done your benchmarking, you've put the data in place, you've set up the reports, you've done all the checks that are needed, and you can just breathe, right? Like that was a lot of work, and I think it's kind of unfair for us to assume that when, oh, it's okay, it's just another Black Friday. There is so much work that happens in the background before that you know just takes months and months and months of planning, and we don't really give ourselves a chance to breathe. But this is kind of like just the before peak side. This is kind of what it looks like. I mean, we benchmark our data, right? And then we set up our reports. We make sure that our seasonal page updates are in place. We optimize our internal linking, right? Because that's super important. We update the content on those pages. We perform all the health checks that are needed from a tech perspective. We put that plan in place for out of stock to make Hannah happy. And then we go live, right? And then it's kind of like a little bit out of your control at that point. And during peak, while it's happening, it could be a week, it could be something really, really quick, you know, or it could be something that lasts several months. There's a lot of websites who are like, okay, well, our peak season starts from October, lasts all the way till February. So you just need to kind of monitor what's happening during that time. We know that it's based on a lot of different things. It could be a very quick, it's launch time. This is only going to last a week, or it could be much longer. But it's really all about monitoring. So things you kind of keep checking during peak season is, well, how's my data looking? Like that table we showed earlier, kind of like be updating it as you go to try to see, all right, have I hit target yet? Have I actually exceeded how I was doing last peak or not yet? Am I way far off? You know, is there anything we can kind of do there? How's my technical setup, right? Like I'm doing my regular crawls, I'm making sure that nothing is broken. Always, I blame VM teams and trading teams all the time. Navigation, something isn't there, something is there. Like that tends to be like a typical problem. All my internal links, are they fine? Are there any issues there? Everything that I requested very nicely to be added, is it still in there? Has anything been taken away? Do I have any redirect chains? All the time, they love to creep up when it comes to making changes to like different seasonal hub pages and so forth. And if needed, you know, let's action the out of stock plan. Let's make sure we have something in place for that. And just, you know, keep all the stakeholders updated, because what happens, like, you know, during peak period, it can be like very, very stressful and everyone's like, oh, how are we doing? How are we performing? Let's not wait for them to ask us, how's it going? How's it looking? You know, let's just make sure we have those answers ready. And because we've done all that work before, we have all these beautiful dashboards ready, we have that answer right away. We're able to update them with how things are looking. And then after peak, right? Like what happens after that? It's kind of all about communication at that point, communication and learning. So, you know, share the data that they care about. Share the data that your stakeholders care about. I don't think it matters too much if that super, super, super long tail keyword, I don't know, what in visibility. Like, they're not going to care about that. They're going to care about, well, how much money did we make? And did we perform better than the year before? Did we have enough share compared to some of our competitors? And the thing is, it might be good news, right? Like, you might go up and be like, I have the best news ever. 10% growth in traffic, 5% growth in revenue. Like, we've done great. We've done great this week. Or, you know, we've all been here before where it might be bad news, right? It might be like, oh, actually, not so great. You know, we had a loss in traffic, we had a loss in revenue. But in either case, right, like whether it's good or bad, it's very important for us to like put together like a retrospective action plan. And, you know, we kind of answer three things. So we talk about, well, what went well, right? So what do we want to do the same next time? This was great. It worked great. We don't want to change it. We want to make sure we do exactly the same thing next peak. And then the second thing is, well, what didn't go so well? Did an unexpected issue arise? Was there miscommunication between two teams? Did something not go according to plan? Was something broken? And then, well, all right, from what happened, what are our learnings? What is the plan that we're going to put in place for next peak season? And we need to agree this now. Even if the next peak season might not happen until another year or, you know, another half year, we need to make sure we have a plan in place about what's going to happen next. And it doesn't matter if it's good or bad news. If it's good news, we still should do that retrospective because there's a lot of learnings that can come from it in terms of how we can do even better the next time around. So the reason why it's really, really important to agree a plan now is this is usually the best time to put a business case forward of, you know what, I really need more content resource, or I need a dev who's dedicated on this to kind of help us the next time around. You have data and you have a case study right there that can help, you know, lead a business case forward for you to get that in motion and get that in agreement before the next peak season comes around. All right, let's wrap up. So in summary, what we kind of talked about was the three different phases of how we would make sure that we are optimizing our site well for seasonality. Before peak, it's all about benchmarking that data. It's all about putting a plan together about all the different seasonal pages, updates that we're going to do, all the internal linking that's needed, and then all the reporting that we need to set up. And then it's about pressing that go live button and going ahead. During, it's all about monitoring that data. It's making those tech checks, and it's keeping stakeholders informed throughout and seeing what's happening. And then after peak, communicating what happened, whether it's good news or bad news, doing a retrospective action plan, putting that in place, and making sure we have a solid plan and a business case forward for what is needed for next peak. You will find all the slides here on my beautiful new shiny website. There's actually 40 seconds left. I cannot believe I did this in time. Thank you so much. I'll be around in the Q&A. Thank you.